I always knew there was something off about the house on Blackwood Lane. When I inherited it from my great-aunt Emily, the family black sheep, I was skeptical. But my life in the city had become unbearable, and the thought of a secluded home in the country was a welcome escape. The day I moved in, a dense fog hung low over the house, shrouding it in an eerie silence. The locals eyed me warily as I passed through the village, their whispers following me like shadows. Despite their reluctance, I was determined to make this place my own. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and creaking floorboards. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. I spent the first few days cleaning, unearthing long-forgotten trinkets and family heirlooms. Among them, I found a leather-bound journal belonging to my great-aunt. It was filled with cryptic entries about the children and the whispers. At first, I dismissed them as the ramblings of a lonely old woman. But as the days passed, I began to feel a presence in the house, a feeling of being watched. It started with the whispers. At night, as I lay in bed, I could hear faint murmurs just beyond the edge of sleep. I would get up, thinking it was the wind or the creaking of the old house, but the whispers persisted. They seemed to come from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere and nowhere at once. One night I decided to follow the whispers. They led me to the attic, a place I had been avoiding since I moved in. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, the whispers growing louder with each step. The attic was a dusty, cluttered space filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. In the corner, I saw a small wooden rocking chair swaying gently back and forth, though there was no breeze. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I felt a cold hand brush against my neck, and I spun around, but there was no one there. Heart pounding, I fled the attic, vowing never to return. The next day, I found an old photograph album among my aunt's belongings. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. In almost every picture, there were shadowy figures lurking in the background. Children, their faces pale and eyes hollow, stared out from the photographs, their expressions vacant and haunting. I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light or a flaw in the film, but deep down I knew there was something more. That night, as I lay in bed, I saw them, faint, ghostly apparitions of children standing at the foot of my bed. They didn't move or speak. They just watched me with those hollow eyes. Panic surged through me, and I bolted from the bed, running to the living room. As I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil. She raised a hand and pointed towards the basement door. The basement was the one place in the house I hadn't explored. It was dark, damp, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. But I knew I had to go down there. The veiled woman was gone, but her presence lingered, urging me forward. I descended the creaky steps, flashlight in hand. The basement was filled with old furniture, broken toys, and stacks of dusty boxes. In the far corner, I found a small door, barely visible behind a pile of crates. It was locked, but the key was hanging from a nail on the wall. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped, filled with the stench of mildew and rot. In the center of the room, I saw a circle of small wooden chairs, each one occupied by a child's doll. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. On the floor, I noticed a pattern of strange symbols carved into the wood. They were the same symbols I had seen in my aunt's journal. As I knelt down to get a closer look, I heard the whispers again, louder this time, almost deafening. The whispers grew until they were all I could hear, a cacophony of voices filling my mind. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. I found myself standing in a different room, a nursery. The walls were painted a soft blue, and toys were scattered across the floor. In the center of the room stood a crib, and inside, a baby cried softly. I approached the crib and looked inside. The baby looked up at me with those same hollow eyes, and I realized with horror that it was one of the children from the photographs. Before I could react, the scene shifted again, and I was back in the basement. The veiled woman stood before me, her veil lifted to reveal a face twisted in anguish. She reached out a hand and touched my forehead, and suddenly I understood. The children, the whispers, the apparitions, they were all connected. My great-aunt had made a pact with dark forces, sacrificing the children of the village to gain eternal life. But the ritual had backfired, trapping their souls in the house and cursing her to an eternity of torment. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to break the curse. I gathered the dolls and placed them in the circle of chairs, reciting the incantation I had found in my aunt's journal. The room grew cold, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The doll's eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and the house began to shake. I felt a force trying to push me out of the room, but I held my ground, continuing the incantation. The symbols on the floor glowed, and the spirits of the children appeared around me, their faces no longer hollow, but filled with a sense of peace. With a final surge of energy, the house shuddered, and the whispers stopped. The dolls collapsed to the floor, lifeless once more. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, and I knew the curse had been broken. The house on Blackwood Lane was no longer a place of fear. The spirits of the children were at peace, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. I spent the next few days cleaning up the basement and sealing the small room, determined to leave the past behind. As I prepared to leave, I found one last entry in my great-aunt's journal. It was a letter addressed to me, written in a shaky hand. She apologized for the horrors she had unleashed and begged for my forgiveness. She had hoped that one day someone would come to break the curse and free the children. I left the journal on the mantelpiece and walked out of the house, closing the door behind me. As I drove away, I looked back one last time. The house stood silent and still, a testament to the horrors it had witnessed and the peace it had finally found. I never returned to Blackwood Lane, but the memories of that place stayed with me. It was a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places and the strength it takes to confront it. Though now that I'm looking back at it, what was it that my great-aunt wanted an eternal life for? Was it for herself, or was it for something greater that we won't be able to understand? Is there a greater force that is forcing her to do these actions? And where did she even learn how to cast the spells? I have so many questions left to be answered, but one thing is for certain, that we are not alone. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.